Hello there and good evening. You are watching the L24 News live from Algiers. With me, I'm Abdurrahim Kashour, and coming up next in our program. Kazakh President Tokayev commanded his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin for quickly resolving the issue of sending a CS2 peacekeeping conditional to the Republic. World tennis star Novak Djokovic won court appeal after being detained in immigration hotel for not being vaccinated against the COVID-19. West African nations will close their borders with Mali, cut diplomatic ties and impose tough economic sanctions in response to its unacceptable delay in holding elections following the 2020 military coup. And finally, this year's Golden Globes ceremony is going to look very different, and for once, that has nothing to do with the pandemic. Hello again and welcome. Kazakh President Tokayev thanked his Russian counterpart and ally Vladimir Putin for sending troops to help end days of bloody riots in the country that forced the imposition of state of emergency. Hussein Burkan on What's Follow.
Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev thanked his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin for his quick response to the Collective Security Treaty Organization peacekeeping forces. Tokayev expressed his gratitude during a speech addressed to the Kazakh people.
The militants have not laid down their arms. They continue to commit crimes or prepare them. We should fight them to the end. Those who don't surrender will be eliminated. I would like to express my special gratitude to Russian President Vladimir Putin. He reacted very quickly and, most importantly, in a friendly and warm manner to my appeal.
Tokayev also described the proposals coming from abroad to negotiate with the riots as unacceptable and affirmed that it is stupid to negotiate with criminals and murderers. It is noteworthy that the president of Kazakhstan ordered security personnel to open fire without warning at what he described as terrorists in the event of further disturbances, while the commander of Russian Airborne Forces, Lieutenant General Andrei Serkyukov, who led his country's forces to annex Crimea, was appointed head of the peacekeeping forces of the Collective Security Treaty Organization in Kazakhstan.
Amid the talks that began between Russia and US over Ukraine issues, Ukrainian activists have expressed their support for Kazakh protesters. On Sunday, demonstrators in Kiev and Kharkov, Ukraine's second-largest city, held signs that read "Say no to Putin" and flew Kazakhstan flags alongside Ukrainian ones. As 100,000 Russian troops surrounded Ukraine on three sides, raising the specter of Russian invasion, officials on both sides were pessimistic Sunday about the possibility that upcoming US-Russia talks in Geneva would lead to any real breakthroughs. Osama Yadi on What Follow.
Expectations of a breakthrough have been set low as formal talks opened between senior US and Russian officials in Geneva at the start of a critical week of diplomacy over Ukraine as Russian troops remain massed along its borders. The U.S. Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov and his delegation arrived under Swiss police escort at the U.S. diplomatic mission in Geneva for face-to-face talks with Wendy Sherman, the U.S. Deputy Secretary of State, and her team. On Sunday, Secretary of State Antony Blinken rejected Russian President Vladimir Putin's demands that the U.S. pull troops out of Eastern Europe or rule out expanding NATO to include Ukraine.
Clear that we've offered him two paths forward. One is through diplomacy and dialogue. The other is through deterrence and massive consequences for Russia if it renews its aggression against Ukraine.
Russia has spent the past few months building up its forces on the border with Ukraine, which raised concerns of European countries, mainly Ukraine, which feels threatened. U.S. officials have warned the number of troops could be doubled soon. The US believes that Putin is driven by a desire to restore Russia's sphere of influence over former Soviet countries, and that he fears Ukraine becoming more aligned with the West and joining NATO.
NATO will engage in dialogue with Russia in good faith and on substance. But we must also be prepared for the possibility that diplomacy will fail.
On his part, Ryabkov stated that the two sides seem far apart, and the US requirement that Russia de-escalate is a non-starter, nor would Russia discuss changing its position on Crimea. He added that the two sides have dramatic fundamental differences on those positions.
A baby lost during the chaotic evacuation of tens of thousands of Afghans at Kabul airport has been reunited with his relatives after 5 months. His elated grandfather has said that the boy's father had a 2-month-old Suhaili Ahmadi to a foreign soldier among the Australian crowds desperate to flee the Taliban after the Islamists seized the capital in mid-August. The pair was separated, and what happened next is unclear, but taxi driver Hamid Safi said he found the baby crying and alone on the floor of the airport at the same day. World tennis star Novak Djokovic won court appeal after being detained in an immigration hotel for not being vaccinated against the COVID-19. Djokovic's visa was revoked by Immigration Ministry and he spent 4 days in detention after being released by court judge Anthony Kelly. Usami Yadi.
World number 1 Novak Djokovic was released from Australian immigration detention on Monday after winning a court challenge to remain in the country to pursue his bid for a record 21st Grand Slam title at the upcoming Australian Open. Judge Anthony Kelly ruled the federal government's decision last week to revoke the tennis star's visa was unreasonable and ordered Djokovic be released.
At the same time, he knew the conditions since a lot of months ago, so he makes his own decision.
News of the ruling was greeted with noisy celebrations of drum beating and dancing by a group of around 50 supporters, many draped in the Serbian flag, outside the Melbourne court. Lawyers for the federal government, however, indicated the fight may be not over, telling the court Immigration Minister Alex Hawke was reserving the right to exercise his personal power to again revoke Djokovic's visa. However, Hawke's office did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Djokovic had spent 4 nights in an immigration detention hotel in Melbourne before the hearing got underway at around 10 a.m. local time. The Australian government cancelled Djokovic's visa shortly after he arrived in Melbourne late Wednesday to play in the Australian Open because officials decided he did not meet the criteria for an exemption to an entry requirement that all non-citizens be fully vaccinated for COVID-19.
To a different matter now, military rank court in Myanmar has found civilians leader Aung San Suu Kyi, who was overthrown in last February, guilty on at least 3 charges and sentenced her to 4 more years in prison. The 76-year-old Nobel Peace Prize winner was detained as military seized control of the country nearly a year ago and has been slapped with nearly a dozen charges that critics says are politically motivated. India is all set to begin COVID-19 booster shots or precaution does drive amid rising COVID-19 cases. The precautionary vaccine thus will be given to healthcare workers, frontline workers and individuals aged 16 years and above with the virus. There will be no mix-up as the 3rd dose of the COVID-19 boosters shot will the same vaccine that has been given to them the previous 2 times. Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison has declared that Australia must push throughout the latest COVID-19 waves as Omicron cases continue to skyrocket across the country. Morrison also stated in a wide-ranging press conference on Monday that he doesn't accept the analysis that Australia is the let-rip phase. He also warned being unvaccinated is the most likely way Aussies will end up in hospital with COVID-19. More international news over the COVID-19 as well as the Omicron invasion in this report by Miriam Zian.
In most of Western Europe, citizens took the streets to express their anger against COVID-19 vaccine requirements. In France, over 100,000 people rallied against the government's new plans of vaccination requirements that will be applied by January 15th. In Paris, 18,000 demonstrators carried posters that read "Truth, Freedom, No to Vaccine Pass" and chanted a phrase replying to Macron's statement that resulted in chaos with the same language. According to the French Interior Ministry, 10 people were arrested in the capital and 24 others across France, with some police officers slightly injured. Whereas in Vienna, 40,000 people rallied against vaccine passports requirement, which will be implemented starting from next month. In Germany, protesters rallied in many cities, with a great majority in Hamburg holding posters that read "Enough, hands off our children," since the government is considering to vaccinate children. Vaccination opponents and coronavirus deniers, according to the German health minister Karl Lauterbach, have lost all measure and emphasis in their arguments.
A small group is willing to wipe all scientific knowledge off the table and voluntarily enter the bulb of bogus truths.
And in Italy as well, people protested against the vaccination rules for people above 50 and the people who use public facilities.
Bangladesh's former parliamentary chief has been appointed as the next commander of the People's Liberation Army garrison in Hong Kong. Pang, a Major General, was previously the Deputy Chief of Staff of the People's Armed Police. China's Parliamentary Police Force, President Xi Jinping of China signed his appointment. The city of Banja Luka in Bosnia commemorates the Serb Republic Day. Although it was legally banned in the country in 2015, thousands of people participated in the revival activities, including the President of the Republic of Bosnia and highly ranked officials, along with 800 members of the security forces. Pakistan government formed a committee to investigate the death of at least 21 tourists in the northern hill station of the Murray. The committee will investigate whether severe weather warnings were issued and scattered adequately, whether there were mechanisms in place to regulate the flow of traffic into the popular tourist resort town, and why entry of vehicles was not stopped once the number of tourists became unsustainable. According to the government figures, more than 157,000 vehicles, mainly belonging to tourists, entered Murray between Friday and Saturday when the snowfall began. West African nations will close their borders with Mali, cut diplomatic ties, and impose tough economic sanctions in response to unacceptable delays in holding elections following the 2020 military coup. Zara Furjani on what follow.
West Africa's main regional bloc will close borders with Mali and impose severe economic sanctions in response to delays in holding promised elections after military coup in 2020. The announcement on Sunday followed an extraordinary summit of the leaders of the 15-member Economic Community of West African States in the Ghanaian capital, Accra, to discuss proposal from Mali's transitional authorities to hold elections in December 2025 instead of next month as originally agreed.
The official proposal submitted to me by the transition authorities under the hand of its head indicated that the transition period should run for 5 years. Subsequently, by a letter to me dated 7th January 2022, 2 days ago, the head of the Malian transition stated that the period had now been modified to 4 years.
In a communique, ECOWAS said it found the proposed timetable for transition totally unacceptable, adding that the schedule simply means that an illegitimate military transition government will take the Malian people hostage.
As much as we're aware of the complexity of the situation in Mali, we're convinced that all political, economic and social reforms aimed at rebuilding the country could only be carried by democratically elected authorities.
The organization said it had agreed to impose additional sanctions with immediate effect. These include the closure of members' land and air borders with Mali, the suspension of non-essential financial transactions, the freezing of Malian state assets in ECOWAS commercial banks, and recalling their ambassadors from Bamako. The Malian interim government said it was astonished by the decision. In response, it vowed to close its side of the border with ECOWAS member states, recall its ambassadors, and reserve the right to reconsider its membership in ECOWAS.
After a series of delays that have threatened the country's stability, Somali leaders have announced that they have reached an agreement to hold parliamentary elections by February 25th. The agreement was reached on Sunday after Prime Minister Mohammed Hussein Roble hosted several days to talks with the state leaders aimed at breaking the deadlock over the elections. Children in Uganda have expressed their joy at finally returning to school nearly 2 years after they were closed because of the COVID. But after one of the world's longest school closures, authorities warn at least 30% of students may never return. About 15 million students have been affected by the closure. The government says that some classes reopened in October 2020 temporarily, but closed again in May and June of the following year. While schools were closed, there have been some lessons via the radio, TV, and newspapers, while some schools have provided printed materials, but these have not reached everyone. Iraq's new parliament elected Sunni lawmaker Mohammed al-Halbousi as speaker, paving the way for the formation of new government 3 months after national election.
Halbousi was elected for second term as speaker when the session resumed, defeating Mashahadani, a former speaker of the first parliament, which convened in 2006. According to a statement from the 329-seat parliament, Halbousi won with 200 votes. Mashahadani was hospitalized for fatigue, but he was released after a few hours, according to a statement from the Parliament's office. Parliament now has 30 days from the start of its first session to elect a new president, who will then ask Parliament's largest bloc to form a government. There were matches and heated debates among legislators over which party had the most seats. Fatah and the State of Law coalition, led by former Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki and backed by Iran, submitted a document to acting speaker requesting that their coalition be the largest in parliament. The request was strongly opposed by lawmakers from Shiite clerical Muqtada party, Sadr's, which came first in the October election, defending their position as the largest bloc.
At least 13 Cuban hoping to claim asylum in Europe were forcibly expelled from Greece to Turkey toward the end of the last year, according to Al Jazeera and rights organizations. Allegations made to this letter include accounts of forced undressing, beatings, detention without food or water, confiscation of passports, money and other personal belonging, refusal to register asylum claims, and forced water immersion prior to and during the expulsion process. At least 19 people, including 9 children, died on Sunday, and around 60 were injured in the terrible accidental building fire in the Bronx in New York, one of the worst in the recent history for the megalopolis state. More details with Nabil Khazini.
At least 19 people died, including 9 children, and dozens were injured after a huge fire broke out at a high-rise apartment building in the Bronx in New York. Among the victims, a mother who lost her entire family in the fire.
Well, the fire alarm, of course, started, and then everywhere was smoke, so it was definitely devastating. A lot of smoke. Yeah, until now, when I clear my throat, all I see is black mucus. It was so serious. I've never seen anything like it before.
I just hear like it's 19 people die, something like that. So it's very sad. It's very sad.
While the reasons are still unknown, an electric space heater is being blamed for sparking the horrific fire, the worst New York City has witnessed in decades.
This is going to be one of the worst fires that we have witnessed during modern times here in the city of New York.
The fire started just before 11 a.m. in a duplex apartment on the second and third floors of the building. Victims had suffered from severe smoke inhalation.
Actually, due to all the smoke and just inhaling it, it's just so thick, and it's like you cannot breathe. It's like you're being suffocated.
Firefighters arrived within 3 minutes and encountered smoke that extended the entire height of the 19-story building.
This smoke extended the entire height of the building, completely unusual. Members found victims on every floor in stairwells and were taking them out in cardiac and respiratory arrest.
Bronx apartment was built in 1972, and it was home to a large African Muslim immigrants community. It has no fire escapes, and residents must rely on the stairwells in the event of an emergency. The incident comes a week after a dozen of people, including 8 children, have also died in a catastrophic residential fire that broke out in a crowded row house in Philadelphia.
A shocking video shows the moment of Metrolink train slammed into a small plane that crashed on its tracks in Los Angeles. Police in Los Angeles have been hailed as heroes after pulling a man from the crash plane seconds before it was hit by an oncoming train. Just 5 seconds after he is pulled from the plane, a train smashed into it and sent the debris flying. Police confirmed that the pilot was the only person on board and that the plane had lost power before going down. Venezuela's opposition has won the gubernatorial re-election in Barinas, a tense region ruled by the family of late President Hugo Chavez for more than 2 decades. Hussein Berkan.
Former Venezuelan Vice President and Foreign Minister Jorge Arriaza conceded his defeat in the elections for the governor of Barinas state. Amidst a heavy security presence, the residents of the strategic and symbolic state of Barinas, being the birthplace of the late Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez, were called to choose a new governor after the judiciary canceled the results of the previous poll that took place in November. Ultimately, the little-known Sergio Garrido became the opposition candidate against Jorge Arriaza, the former vice president, former foreign minister, and Chavez's son-in-law, winning the seat of the governor. Sergio Garrido said that this victory will open doors to a better future.
We are going to celebrate this victory with everybody, and we are going to do it carefully, respecting the sanitary measures. For all colleagues out there, a new era has just started. It begins with this victory. This triumph will give us the keys to open the doors and windows to a better future, a future closer to freedom.
In Barinas, the state capital, polling stations witnessed the participation of about 600,000 voters. Arriaza hails from Caracas but was disqualified as a candidate in that state after the results of the previous poll were cancelled. The opposition denounced a breach against the denial of the candidate Freddy Soberlano of his victory in the November elections. While the elections results were published in all the 23 Venezuelan states, Barinas' results were delayed for days before being suspended after 90% of the votes had been counted. Freddy Soberlano was the winner with 37.60% of the votes compared to 37.21% for Argenis Chavez.
Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Saeed Hatibzadeh said on Sunday's high-level talks with Taliban officials were positive, but that Iran was still not at the point of formally recognizing the Taliban. The Taliban delegation, led by the group's Foreign Minister Amir Khan Muttaqi, met with the Iranian counterpart led by Foreign Minister Hussein Amir Abdul Hayyan. It was the first such visit by Taliban delegation since the group sparked the collapse of the Western-backed government over the chaotic withdrawal of US-led forces in August. More international news in this roundup by Nadia Kazmi.
An explosion in eastern Afghanistan near the border with Pakistan has killed at least 9 children and wounded 4 others. The blast of Monday took place when a cart selling food items struck on old and exploded mortar. Floods around South Africa's eastern coastal city of East London have killed at least 10 people and left hundreds homeless since the weekend as rivers burst their banks and roads were inundated. At least 22 people, including 10 children, have died in Pakistan's popular hill station Murree after heavy overnight snowfall caused traffic jams that trapped tourists in their vehicles with many freezing to death. The last 7 years were the world's hottest on record, with the first analysis of global temperature in 2021 showing it was 1.2 Celsius above pre-industrial levels. The assessment of the year by the European Climate Agency, Copernicus, also found carbon dioxide in the atmosphere reached record levels and that the potent greenhouse gas methane surged very substantially, also to a new record.
Foreign ministers from Gulf countries arrived in Beijing today, Monday, for a 5-day visit amid escalation events in neighboring Kazakhstan, which raised concerns about China's energy security. Officials from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Oman, and Bahrain, as well as Secretary General of the Gulf Cooperation Council, will stay in China until Friday and are expected to discuss energy ties with Beijing. Oil prices rose in Kazakhstan and Libya due to the supply concerns and the rapid global rise in infections with the muted Omicron of the coronavirus. These prices rose 5% after protesters in Kazakhstan disrupted train lines and damaged production in the country's largest oil fields, while pipelines maintains in Libya reduced production from 1.3 million barrels per day last year to 729,000 barrels per day. And now it is time to have a look at world news in the economic sector.
According to a study conducted by the Center for Economics and Business Research, absenteeism caused by COVID-19 isolation and staff shortages in the United Kingdom could result in a £35 billion loss, equivalent to 8.8% of gross domestic product (GDP) over January and February. This comes while Boris Johnson faced renewed pressure to act to get Britain back to normal. Turkey discarded a plan to use bonds to pay for banks' possible losses, a new way from the government to bolster the lira. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's ruling party voted to remove the clause on payments in bond instead of cash, according to Parliamentary Planning and Budget Committee. After the company announced the vaccine requirements in October, Citigroup will dismiss unvaccinated employees by the end of the month. The bank reminded its employees that they must be fully vaccinated as a condition of employment, and they have to submit proof of vaccination by January 14. Those who haven't complied by next week will be put on unpaid leave, with their last day of employment being January 31. BMW took the crown as the best-selling luxury brand in the world after selling out Mercedes-Benz for the first time in 5 years. BMW sold a record 2.2 million cars a year, while Mercedes fell 5% to 2.05 million units. BMW officially ended 2021 as the best-selling manufacturer of luxury cars in the United States. From January to December last year, BMW sold more than 300,000 cars in the United States. This was a gain of 21% over the weak sales recorded in 2020, and in line with the sales of 2019.
Bob Saget, the comedian and actor arguably known best audiences as wholesome patriotic Danny Tanner on the sitcom Full House, has died today aged 65. Saget's family have issued a statement to media confirming his death, saying that they are devastated to confirm the beloved Bob passed away today. Tributes have begun pouring in for Bob Saget. This year's Golden Globe ceremony looks very different, and for once, that has nothing to do with the pandemic. The 2022 awards went ahead without any big stars in attendance to present or collect the prizes, and there was no television broadcast after Hollywood boycott over its diversity and ethics scandals. What follow?
The Golden Globe went ahead despite being pulled by NBC following a controversy surrounding voting body, the Hollywood Foreign Press Association. Last year, the organization's voting membership faced a Hollywood boycott after it was revealed there were no black members. Many studios and notable figures openly criticized the HFPA, with Tom Cruise going so far as to return his 3 awards. Ultimately, NBC dropped the ceremony, meaning the 2022 edition will not be televised or streamed online. This year's nominees were not in attendance. The HFPA announced each winner on its website. Netflix's The Power of the Dog won 3 awards, including Best Director for Jane Campion. Other acting honors went to Will Smith for playing the determined father of tennis stars Venus and Serena Williams in King Richard, and Nicole Kidman for her role as Lucille Ball in Being the Ricardos. Steven Spielberg's West Side Story, a tale of young love set among rival street gangs, was named Best Musical or Comedy Film. The film earned 3 trophies overall, including Best Actress for Rachel Zegler. In the past, winning a Globe provided a boost to movies making a run for the Oscars. This year, the significance is less clear.
Coming up now to sports, and precisely to Africa, Cameroon was on the level and opening ceremony to host this AFCON 2021. Cameroon and Burkina Faso were honored to hold the opening game of the African Cup of Nations at Olympic Stadium in the Cameroon capital of Yaoundé yesterday evening. Ushar Gomishka, a Cameroonian journalist that is got in touch with the Al24 News team over there and has this to say.
Well, first of all, this is a repeat of the opening game for both teams, as we saw in 2017 in neighboring Gabon. It was a very exciting game. As you can see, both teams have a lot of pressure, but also big-bodied players who are very strong and ready to defy whatever has been said before the tournament. For Cameroon, they're playing at home, and you know that means that they have great support. The fans came out crazy by 10 a.m. in the morning. The stadium was almost half full, and you could see the excitement, you know, what it means to Cameroon to host the AFCON for the first time in 50 years, so since 1972. And also, you know, to see the president here, but then you also have Samuel Eto'o, who is now the president of the federation, and we know that he's the all-time goal scorer of the Africa Cup of Nations with 18 goals. So for him to just sit up there and try to enjoy the game, it was beautiful to see. But then also Vincent Aboubakar scoring 2 penalties to help Cameroon, and everyone can agree that they were not contentious. So that tells you the importance of having VAR at the Africa Cup of Nations right from the group stages. So not taking chances, and everyone knows that this is what to expect. But also I want to take you back. Burkina Faso scoring the very first game, the very first goal in the tournament, and very early on to put pressure on Cameroon, but how they bounced back just shows you that this is a team that has a lot of character.
Ushar Komoshiga congratulates the chosen Algerian referees for the opening game, saying that Mustafa Urbal and his assistants had delivered a great performance that no one dared to criticize them.
First of all, I would like to say that Mustafa, the referee from Algeria, he did an incredible job today. No one can say that he made a mistake, you know, in anything, because when he thinks that he's not ready and he's not sure, he said, oh, let me go and check the VAR. And he checked it and he made the right decision. And the same for the second penalty. It was a very bold decision to make, you know, to give 2 penalties in, you know, the first game of the tournament. And he made the right call. And you can see the players, they respected every decision that he was making. No one is trying to say, oh, you know, you're on their side, oh, you're on their side, oh, because they're the host team. So for that, you have to give Mustafa a lot of credit. And Mabruk. Very big congratulations to him, and we hope that all the other referees, you know, continue to show that African football is growing every other day.
Quite interesting. The Algerian team is fine-tuning the preparation for the encounter against Sierra Leone on the first day of the Group A at the African Cup of Nations in Cameroon, just 24 hours before the tournament begins. And within today's press conference, the national coach Jamal Belmadi and the team captain Riyad Mahrez emphasized on the idea that Algeria is looking forward to fight for the title again and again like never before.
Before I start talking about the Algerian selection and the African Cup of Nations, I would pay tribute to Abdelkarim Karoum, the former F1 player who left us yesterday. We need to follow these icons because they are like our examples by their careers and in defending our country. About this competition, we came here as the title holders. In such a big competition, where there is a high level and competitive teams, nothing is impossible because all nations are unpredictable. We are getting to this battle with a lot of ambition. My ambition is ultimate, to keep the title in our hands. It's not easy, but this is our first and last goal.
As our manager said, we reached another CAN after 3 years, and even we are the titles holders, it doesn't mean that we are favorable or that we will win the competition for the third time. It will be even harder in comparison with the previous CAN, and I think also that the level of other teams is not as it was in Egypt.
On the other side, Sierra Leone's national coach John Kista, with the press conference, stated that his men will not be afraid to face Algeria tomorrow, saying that the Algerian team is a so strong team and they have reached great levels, but the numbers were made to be broken, and I will lead my players to achieve positive results.
I think we have to come into this competition and play against the better teams in Africa, and Algeria is one of those teams. It's important that, we play against the better teams because it helps our development as a country.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's have a reminder for our main stories. Kazakh President Tokayev commended his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin for quickly resolving the issue of sending CSTU peacekeeping conditional to the Republic. World tennis star Novak Djokovic won court appeal after being detained in immigration hotel for not being vaccinated against COVID-19. West African nations will close their borders with Mali, cut diplomatic ties and impose tough economic sanctions in response to its unacceptable delay in holding elections following the 2020 military coup. This year's Golden Globe ceremony is going to look very different, and for once that has nothing to do with the pandemic. That's all the news we have grasped for today's bulletin. The L24 news program is still rolling forward, so stay tuned for that latest updates in our news program. See you, bye-bye, and good night.